It's my pleasure to introduce my relatively new friend, Sam Potolicchio, who will guide us through a conversation with a longtime Twinian, Grzegorz Kolodko. Grzegorz Kolodko, as many of you might recall, was the Deputy Prime Minister of Poland on a number of terms, and also was one of the individuals who helped bring Poland into the West in the Round Table, the famous Round Table group. And recently I had the pleasure in Finland of meeting Esko Aho, the former Prime Minister of Finland, who also shared a number of his perspectives when we were there, and he's with us to share those perspectives today. So with that, I'd like to welcome Sam, Esko, and Greg to the stage.
Thank you.
All right.
So I think it would be malpractice if we didn't start off this trialogue talking about the literal elephant in the room yesterday, which would be President Trump at the Super Bowl of diplomacy, where Europe literally laughed at him, and he laughed back. And I wanted to
But he laughed himself as well.
He made a good self-deprecating joke, probably the first one he's ever made. Two questions, twofold question. Number one, is Trump just an asterisk on foreign policy for the United States and also the Atlantic relationship? And number two, is American leadership, particularly given the relationship with the EU, in a permanent state of decline?
How much time do we have?
No, it's not a permanent time. It will last till the end of the term of Mr. Trump in the White House, and then we'll be back to normal.
I'm a bit even more pessimistic, because Trump is not alone. Mr. Xi in China, Putin in Russia, Erdogan in Turkey, and so on. So we have politicians now globally who are having not the same kind of way of doing things, but a lot of similarities. And unfortunately, this rule-based world is challenged by deal-based ideas.
The transactional foreign policy. Is there a question that nobody's really asking in the pundit class that we should be asking about this relationship? And when you pose that question, what's the answer to that question if you have one?
My answer is that if you look Russia, especially Russia, why not also China and Turkey as well? You have to ask, what is the fundamental mindset that is driving to this kind of situation? You should read one book titled Collapse of an Empire. It's written by former acting Prime Minister Grzegorz Kołodko. He passed away in 2009, but he wrote a book about the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he predicted that actually there is a risk that Russia is going to suffer from post-imperial nostalgia, like he called it. And what you are seeing today is exactly that. And in China, that post-imperial mindset is there. In Turkey as well. America, great again. What is that? It's nostalgia.
I wouldn't put all these guys in one basket. Actually, there is the common denominator between Trump, Putin, Erdogan, Xi, and some lesser figures, including, for instance, Hungarian Orban or Polish Kaczynski, to which we may refer as new nationalism. And new nationalism is a wrong answer for wrong system and policy, which was overwhelming leading factor before neoliberalism. So, enemy of my enemy doesn't make my friends. Now I have two major enemies. One is neoliberalism, which is working on enriching the few at the cost of many, and was the driving force of the recent world economic and financial crisis, and the other is new nationalism. But it's a paradox of contemporary world that at the same time when President of the United States, of this greatest country in the world, at the stairs of the Capitol Hill, is shouting because he was not speaking, America first, the leader of China, still called communism, what kind of communism it is since they are building capitalism, in Davos at the World Economic Forum, was giving the speech in favor of protection of free trade, continuation of inclusive globalization, and so on. So each and every of them, Trump, Putin, Xi, are inward-oriented. They take care of the domestic agenda in a different way. But if you judge them from the Moscow or Beijing or Washington perspective, the picture is different than the judgment from the global perspective. But it's a paradox that now we can put much more trust, say, in global policy or approach to the global affairs from Beijing than from Washington. The American president yesterday said at the United Nations that there is no room for global governance. He's all the time, shouting America first, but it's anti-global. And for that reason, he's going to lose, because globalization is an irreversible process.
Let's take a step back. Given both of your outsized roles in welcoming your countries into the EU, can you explain an underrated historical cause for this new nationalism or populism that's starting to rise up in Hungary, in Italy, even in Poland?
I just read an article about US domestic policy in the 1850s and 1850s, just before the Civil War. And there are a lot of similarities. And I think it's not a coincidence that we are facing these kind of phenomena today. They are closely linked to globalization, but also technological development. Media is changing in a massive way. Technological transformation is going on in a massive way. People are losing jobs. They have to move. They have to take totally new kind of approach to the future. And this is not going to happen overnight. Technology is much faster. Technological change is much faster than the change of mindsets and the change of culture. That's, in my opinion, the biggest problem now. And political system is closer to culture than technology.
There is a great deal of Euroscepticism in most of the European countries, starting from Great Britain. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Brexit. But unfortunately, this is the shame. This is the greatest shame of my life. I was at the helm of economic policy when we brought Poland first to OECD and then to the European Union. I was at the round table 29 years ago when we started this post-communist transformation. At that time, two countries were leading pro-democracy and pro-market movement among so-called communist countries of East Central Europe and so on. That was Hungary and Poland. I'm joking now that there is the mistaken Bible, because Bible says that the last will be the first. It's supposed to be written that the first will be the last. We were the leaders, and now we are, the laggards of the process, because the most Euroscepticism you see among the new members of the European Union, I'm referring to the so-called post-communist countries, precisely in Warsaw and Budapest. Why? Because these are homogeneous countries, especially Poland, which is what was a good factor. That was the legacy of the World War II. One nation, one culture, one religion. And unfortunately, Poles are xenophobic. They don't like the strangers. We do accept Ukrainians, for instance, which are not the European Unions. But there is not such a tolerance, as you may observe, even contemporary in US or in France or in Britain, for people from Middle East, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a shame. And the second factor is just the politics, that the current bureaucracy, the government, the right of the center, or actually right government of so-called law and justice, they simply they don't like that they have to give a little bit of power, of sovereignty to European institutions, to Brussels, to Frankfurt, to Luxembourg. So it is also a little bit skeptic toward the great influence of Germany within the European Union. There is much more about economics than about economics, because from economic side, we are the great benefactor of the European Union and enlargement and integration.
Esko, you were closer to 35 than 40 when you became Prime Minister
36
of Finland.
in the age of my oldest son today. And
do you tell him that?
He is not capable to become Prime Minister.
He's not in the audience.
Yeah. That was a joke.
No, we don't want our children to be president, even, of the United States or Prime Minister, because what is the difference between science and politics? In science and research, it's difficult, but it's enough to be right. to be correct, to know that 2 times 2 makes 4, period. You go to the politics, especially at the time of democracy, which we do appreciate, you need majority. And you have to convince the people, that the 2 times 2 makes 4. And then, Mr. Trump or another populist, Lafarge or Marine Le Pen, they are coming, they say, no, it can be much, how much you want, 2 times 2, 7, okay, we can deliver. So, and they are getting majority, and you are professor of university, distinguished economist, you became deputy prime minister or prime minister, minister of finance, and you go to the parliament, you cannot say to them, you are an idiot. You have to say, it is very interesting viewpoint, but allow me that I will not agree with you, I will stand that it is 4, and you are short of majority, and you have to stay the course, to fight day after day. It's more difficult, than to conquer the southern pole.
Well,
but you had some question for me.
well, the question is, and given this tirade, what is the new type of political leadership that could possibly deal with some of these vexing issues that we have? And is there somebody right now on the global landscape, or that might be at the deputy prime minister level or the ministerial level, that we should start to look at? Right? Who's the Macron before Macron? And who is someone that you think will take the mantle of global leadership and fight this new nationalism?
This is the most critical question in today's world. I think we have to ask what kind of leadership we need. I've been in politics, in executive role in politics, but also in business with Nokia, seeing the rise and fall and again rise of major company, global company. I'd like to say, if you want to be a good leader, you have to lead with a concept. You have to have conceptual understanding what's going on. And I think that if I'm now European decision maker, I think in spite of all these difficulties we face in Europe today, Europe has great potential just now. If Europe is able to provide the right kind of leadership now, I think that Europe can really make a difference in the global politics. As far as environmental issues are concerned, as far as trade issues are concerned, also in the field of security in a broad sense. The problem in Europe is that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Europeans started to speak about social Europe, new constitution. They were dreaming that one day European politics is going to be like the politics of the United States, which has federal system. And luckily today no one is asking us to do exactly the same as Americans have done when we have seen all this mess in the US system. So I think that we have to move back to basics in Europe. And the European Union can be very powerful. It has a lot of opportunities to say in the global politics if it will concentrate to these 3 basic issues. Questions related to security, trade, and environment.
It's a bumpy road, but I'm positive that the greatest project of our lifetime, that is the European Union integration, including the post-communist transition in the eastern part of Europe, will continue and will get momentum again after the compromise of this rotten new nationalism. It's, not the reverse of history. It is just, a friction. So when we are talking about the leaders, I would like to have a leader here and there which is able to think about the day after tomorrow. Not only about tomorrow, but a day after tomorrow, because most of the problems we have must be addressed in the long-shot problems. Warming the climate, migration, inequality, security, aging societies, or too much fertility in some sub-Saharan countries. Definitely, what Mr. Trump said to the United Nations, it is completely wrong. It's supposed to be otherwise. More of international cooperation. And from this viewpoint, European Union success so far and in the future is a pattern to follow for integration in Latin America, in Central America, in Southeast Asia, in different parts of the world. So when I'm thinking, as I address the issue in my book with the word, the political economy of the future, how it will be in not say 1, 2, 3 years, but say 1, 2, 3 decades, I think that the world will consist of a dozen or so deep, more advanced even than today, integration groupings, and China, because China is big enough, then China do not have to integrate with any particular country. They are just integrating with the world economy. They are the great gainers, winners of globalization. Now they are talking about win-win globalization, but whenever I'm going to China, and I'm going there pretty often, I'm kidding that, you know, by win-win globalization, you mean 2-0 for China. That is not what is not going to happen.
I want to return to China in a second, but
may I say one thing about the European Union? European Union was a concept. After the Second World War, it was a concept how European states should act together in order to keep peace, to get prosperity, economic growth. By the way, the present global order, which was created after the Second World War as well, it's a concept. And by the way, America was leading that conceptual thinking. Now the US is, unfortunately, US leading not destruction, but challenging this order.
well, let's grade the current global order. Greg, in your last book, you were eerily accurate in some of your forecasts. But one thing you said if Trump wins the election, and if the growth in China slows, and if the relationship between Russia and NATO and Russia and the EU becomes worse, we're going to have a really bleak situation. Well, all of these transpired. What do we think about the health of the current global order right now?
Well, there is much more on global chaos contemporary than global order, but we have to keep going. The more negotiations, the better. You may like or not Mr. Xi or Mr. Trump or Mr. Putin, but I'm glad that Helsinki welcomed both leaders, Putin and Trump, with all the problems. You know, Helsinki was again on the agenda as in 1975, where you hosted the European detente process and so on. So you're asking, you said that I do a forecast. Actually, I'm not doing forecast. I'm not forecasting. I'm talking about the future. There are two categories of the future. Unavoidable. For instance, we will be 9 billion by 2050. That is unavoidable. But say warming climate, how much? This is disputable. This is what can be managed, but it calls for global coordination. So for that reason, the question is how to govern the interconnected world from financial, economic, demographic, ecological viewpoint. And I'm making an assumption that there won't be the war. That is absolutely out of my train of thought. But this is not totally impossible. You can draw a scenario that you have the Third World War, but I presume it is not going to happen. There will be proxies like we have now in Syria or in Yemen and somewhere else. We don't know where we'll have another local conflict, say in 15 or in 25 years from now. But these turbulent years will be just in the past by the end of the next decade, but that they are the tectonic shift. You know, you have to accept that China, on terms of purchasing power parity, is already bigger than the United States. This is irreversible. You have to compete, not in Trump way, to say that they are stealing and cheating, you know. One must be an idiot to go to Europe and to say that European Union is American foe. And that was what was said by American president, you know.
But this
We have Americans here. Some of you voted, you know, for this man of state.
Esko, you were more cautious back in your time in government about what the EU could possibly do. If you look back, has anything surprised you about the EU's performance and what it's been able to accomplish as a concept?
I think, as I said, the fundamental mistake was made when the Soviet system collapsed. And
It wasn't a mistake.
It was not a mistake, but mistake was made both in Russia and in the European Union. In Russia, Yeltsin did not change institutions. He wanted only to have his own guys to lead these institutions. And that was a fundamental mistake in Russia. By the way, in the European Union, we expect it now, we have won. There is no any challenges. Now we can start living nicely without any risks. Geopolitics has never disappeared. It has always been there. And that's something I think we made a fundamental mistake. Second point, I'm reading Economist. It's a very good magazine. And the last page is full of data about world economy. Look at that data.
Yeah.
plus, 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 plus. Growth is everywhere. And this is very strange that in the same time when we have all these chaotic things going on, we have economic growth rate, which is rather good after all these challenges we have faced. And I think this is very important to be kept in mind. It's not so important what's happening today, but what is going to be a trend. Can we change the trend? And I believe that concepts are needed in order to change the trend.
You
We have to change certain trends. For instance, demographic trend we have to change if we want to survive in Europe because, you know, the birth rate is firmly below replacement. So we have to import labor, but some countries, because of cultural and political reasons, they don't accept immigrants and so on and so on, and you are trying to build the world. But it's a long shot problem. You said about the mistake of Mr. Yeltsin or European Union. The biggest mistake 3 decades ago was by the great American political scientist Frank Fukuyama, who declared end of history because there was the end of the Cold War. Communism ceased to exist. So now a triumph of liberal democracy. And take a look, now you know the Hungarian leader is saying we prefer illiberal democracy and we are looking for this. As long as there are conflict of interests and they are going to stay forever, there will be the history. Because politics is about solving the conflicting interests. And there will be soon at the end of the world, than the end of the history. So the question is how to lead the nations, the national economies, with the different agenda at the time of irreversible globalization. And therefore, if you will call me at 3 o'clock and you will say, Greg, not without another 20 minutes, just you have 20 seconds, what is the biggest challenge for the remaining part of your life? And I wish you 100+ years in good health. I would say, in a nutshell, this is the global governance. And yesterday I heard from the United States president, that there is no room for the global government, that he respects each and every nation, and everybody is supposed to take care of himself. Yeah, you take care of yourself, but aside of that, you are the members of the society, you are the members of the community, you belong to your companies, to your families, and to the global, to the mankind. So that is, that we are losing momentum, and therefore one more time, I'm betting that, people like Marie Le Pen, or even Law and Justice Party in Poland. They are not for too long. We prefer democracy, so we have to wait, but we have to have the arguments. The problem is not with Mr. Trump or Mr. Kaczynski in democracies, or Mr. Xi or Mr. Putin in quasi or not at all democracies. The problem is that most of the people in these countries, they do support this kind of policies.
Now, I have to say I disagree with you. I don't believe that fundamental problems are Mr. Trump or any other politicians. The fundamental problem is that we have not understood what to do, how to change our systems. I will take this demography as an example. We are living much longer, but we are still committed to the Bismarck idea that 65 is the retirement age. Look at the Russian political situation. Russia is trying to change we say that it's not democracy. People are ordered by Mr. Putin. Putin is doing whatever he wants to do. They are trying to get a bit higher retirement age. What's going on? People are getting crazy, and they are against that, and Putin's support is in decline. So I think sometimes when I'm listening in comments on Trump, it comes to my mind that this is a good explanation that we cannot do what is necessary.
I'm not saying that Trump is the problem. Trump is the result of the
not
problem.
Answer,
It's a reflection of the problem. The new populism is the problem.
No, it's
I'm
indication.
saying that majority of Americans, they have elected the Trump.
No. I don't agree with you. He is not a problem. He is a consequence of those problems that have not been solved.
That is what I just said.
And that's all right. All right. So I think that's discussion we have about Trump now is leading to a situation that our focus is not in the right things. And media is assisting us to do that. Media is not at all interested in solving these institutional and conceptual problems we are facing. They like to have everyday discussion about Trump and his mistakes and his doings, his tweets. The same with China as well. We are looking China from totally different and wrong perspective. That's why I return back to my basic message to you. As well in business, concepts are the most critical things. And look at these 5 platform companies. They are in difficulties. Why? Because their concept is not anymore working. And they have difficulties to create a new concept instead of the old one.
Let's talk about the impact that exogenous forces can have on the EU-US relationship. Particularly, you've mentioned the breakup of the USSR. If you look at breakup of states, USSR, Yugoslavia, EU before Brexit, you see inequality between the states of 6 to 7 to 1. Russia, Tajikistan, Serbia, Kosovo, Germany, Romania. In China, you see inequality inside that country of 10 to 1 regionally. Will China have a big impact and potential economic slowdown or civil unrest on what's going to happen for the future of the EU-US relationship?
Definitely, yes, because China is a quasi-market economy, definitely not a democratic system, but it's very pragmatic. It's very pragmatic, and China is approaching the world economy, globalization, including the part of the world, which is the European Union on the one side of Atlantic and US at the other side, as a partner with which they have to compete. And for that reason, I think that recently the relations between China and the European Union are even better than, say, between European Union and the United States, which is another paradox for the time being. The piece of contemporary geopolitics of utmost importance is the axis Moscow-Beijing. The stupidity of the American policy can contribute to strengthening the link, the feedback, the cooperation, strategic one, including the military one, between China and Russia. Once upon a time, in the early 70s, due to the master move of Kissinger, Mr. Nixon went to Beijing, and at that time, US was able to break the neck of the cooperation between the Soviet Union and China. If did not happen, the course of the world affairs would be quite different. And now, I think it may be already too late to, from the Washington perspective, to put an edge to break the far-going cooperation and coordination of policies between Beijing and China, especially since they are compatible from economic, resources, demographic, and military viewpoint. So therefore, we have to see the power of emerging alliance between China and Russia, and then we have to talk about the relations with the European Union and with the US. And of course, economic relations are one story. And here, I think that the business has a lot to say. Business in US, in Europe, is not interested in deterioration of the relations. Even business in US is not in favor of imposing these tariffs or custom duties for import from China because it is making turbulence here. So in the long run, the business, I think, is on the side of the common sense. Which politics is not always following.
I want to make sure I get both of you in trouble with some wild predictions that you'll have. But Esko, we haven't mentioned Russia enough, and I want to get your opinion. You serve on the board of the most important bank in the country. You're also on the board of the most important university that trains a lot of the future leaders of Russia. What's going on with Russia and the US? How can we explain Trump and Putin? And what do you think? Do you think Russia will reform? Who will take over after President Putin's 4th term?
For the first, you Americans, you have a so-called law of unintended consequences, and I think it worked in the relationship between Russia and the United States. Russians didn't like Hillary Clinton. They expected that Trump. I don't believe that they believed that Trump is going to be elected. It was a surprise for them as well. But what has happening is that when Trump is trying to get better relations, it means that the Congress is getting even tougher and tougher. So unintended consequences are coming. And I think that on the longer term, I'm not sure that this relationship between China and Russia is as easy as it looks today. And there are fundamental problems between these two countries, which are still there. They have common enemy. That's uniting them, but otherwise interests are not there. If I want to be very optimistic about the future, I'd like to say that on the longer term, I cannot see any other alternative for Russia to be modernized than to work with Europe, with Western Europe. That's the only opportunity for Russia to get out of this position they are, which is not very favorable on the longer term. On the short term, they can survive, but on the longer term, I don't believe that this concept of Putin's Russia, it's not going to work.
Let's end with 2 yes or no questions. Number 1, is Trump the president on January 20th, 2021?
You are asking me?
Both of you.
Polish.
And this is a prediction, not a desire.
Ask the American electorate. I believe in the common sense of the American majority, and he is not. But the question is who will be the candidate of the Democratic Party, because that's the American system. You know, their free choice is him or me. That's the free choice the Americans have. But if there will be the good enough candidate, then Trump will go to the history miserable one.
Maybe some optimism now?
If he will be the president, then we have to emigrate. You know, I prefer Finland.
we can take another 5 million, but not more than that.
I'm talking that I'm migrating. I'm not taking 5 million with me.
All right, but I'm a bit more optimistic. I think that US politics, this is not the first time you have crisis in your political life. It's not the first time, unfortunately it's not the last time, but I'm quite confident that there is going to be backlash, and it's going to happen. I don't want to make a prediction, but I think that I have the feeling that he is not going to be re-elected.
And final question, 2025, do we have any Grexit? Do we have any other countries that are going to try to leave the EU?
2025?
Yeah.
You mean the European Union? 2025 won't change that much, but say in the late years of the third decade, by the end of the 20s, we will have more countries in the European Union, including the Balkan countries, maybe even all of them, including Macedonia and Albania and even Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is a basket case of the region, and of course tiny Kosovo, which is the more political than economic problem. And I think that euro will survive the crisis, and there will be the enlargement of euro, and countries like Poland and Hungary and Czech Republic and the other, they will join euro, and euro will be relatively stronger in the future. But Grexit, the problem, the threat of Grexit, is not solved. It's just swept under the carpet, you know. There is no solution to the Greek crisis, which does continue despite the recent good news, without firm writing off. I'm calling it reprofiling, because we don't like to hear about forgiveness, debt forgiveness. I would say about half. If you've never seen the hand, which is worth about, in current dollars, $15 billion, this is it. In this hand, I signed the deal with the London Club of the, about Polish debt in September of 1994. It was based on very tough conditionality, not on our beautiful girls and boys and so on. So we went through a difficult program of structural reforms, institutional building on the way to the European Union. We have succeeded, and slice by slice, 50% of our debt was forgiven. And that opened a great opportunity for Western business, including the American one. Even here, we have people which are dealing with countries like Poland. You know, it pushed forward us towards integrated Europe. If that not happened 22 years ago, we would be today, I would say, more like Ukraine than as we are now. So we are a successful country because there was an understanding. So Brexit is not solved, but I'm positive. But again, in my train of thought, this is not the unavoidable future. It is possible future, it is desired future. And we have to work to this end because it is better than an alternative. But the things get out of control. The things happen the way, I do remember my mantra. The things happen the way they do it because many things happen at the same time. Climate warming, migration, security, inequality, and so on, and idiocy in politics. If there is the very unfortunate coincidence of all these factors, you may have an even bigger crisis, which is plausible, but not very likely. So my answer, the final sentence is, neither back to the business as usual, that is neoliberalism, nor the new nationalism. My proposition is known, you can Google it, new pragmatism, which is a concern about long-term triple balance, not only the economic one, but also on the one hand, ecological one, and on the other hand, the social one, social cohesion, and so on and so on. And they're intertwined, these three paths of development in the future. We are already in beyond GDP economy, which calls for beyond GDP social sciences theory and beyond GDP economic policy and development strategy. So we do know how to attack, how to address the challenges of the future, but as Prime Minister said, it is very much the matter of institutions. So we have to look for a proper reinstitutionalization of the world system, world global system, and it can be not done if everybody will be looking America first, Poland first, Finland first. No, the world affairs first, and the question is how to take the global affairs to our advantage. Is it Finland, Poland, or the United States?
I think we face rather similar challenges like you have seen in the United States. So there are a lot of populism and there are a lot of radicalism on both ends, so on the right and left side. And that is not very positive for the European Union. Secondly, I think there are forces who are saying that the EU is strong again, trying to return back to the same track we are coming from. And I don't believe that that is going to be an option. We still have this idea that constitutional reforms will make Europe stronger. I don't believe in that. I believe, as I said earlier, that if Europe is able to understand that it has winning concept in its, not in its hands, but on the table, if it will take a lead with these three issues, I'm optimistic that the European Union is able to be rather strong in the future. But this let's say interval is going to continue rather long period of time. We are going to see a lot of distrust and a lot of discussion about the future of Europe. But I'm optimistic that at the end of the day, there is going to be new leadership coming out of, and it's coming from Europe. So I believe that the next big thing is not coming from China or the United States. It's coming from Europe.
Long-term optimism, short-term challenge. Thank you both for a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.